Hours after signing my divorce papers, I boarded a flight to Edinburgh with my 2 children while my ex-husband and his wealthy family packed into a VIP maternity clinic to hear his mistress receive her ultrasound results, but the doctor revealed a genetic truth that left all 7 of them completely speechless, and by the time they understood what had happened, the woman they had discarded like garbage had already dismantled their entire empire from 30,000 feet in the air. I am Clara, 33 years old, and a forensic accountant, and spent 8 years married to a man who thought I was nothing but a convenient stepping stone. When his family forced me to sign away my home and my marriage, they handed me a settlement check and laughed. I simply smiled, took my children, and left. They had no idea they were sitting on a massive financial time bomb that I had just detonated. Before I continue the story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a toxic family who thought they could walk all over you. Sign on the dotted line, Clara. Let us not make this any more tedious than it already is. Harrison sounded bored, his voice cut through the sterile, air-conditioned atmosphere of the downtown Boston law office. He did not even have the decency to look me in the eye. Instead, his gaze was fixed on the heavy mahogany conference table, his fingers drumming an impatient, arrogant rhythm against the polished wood. Beside him sat his mother, Patricia, wrapped in a cashmere shawl that cost more than my first car. She exuded an aura of smug satisfaction that she did not bother trying to conceal. On their side of the table sat Harrison, the man I had called my husband for 8 long years. Next to him was Patricia, the matriarch, who had made it her absolute life mission to constantly remind me of my middle-class roots. Beside her sat Richard, my father-in-law, checking his heavy gold Rolex every 2 minutes, as if my very presence was costing him thousands of dollars in billable hours. Sitting slightly behind Harrison, like a Victoria's shadow, was Brittany. Brittany was 24, pregnant, and currently admiring her freshly manicured nails. On my side of the table sat just me and my lawyer. I did not need a crowd, I just needed my pen. We are offering you a very generous settlement, Clara. Patricia chimed in, her voice dripped with the kind of condescension usually reserved for unruly children or hired help. $100,000, considering you contributed practically nothing to the family empire, and given little Luke in his condition, we feel this is more than fair. You relinquish all claims to the Beacon Hill estate. You take the children and you walk away quietly. My focus narrowed, zoning in on the crisp black ink of the settlement check resting on top of the divorce decree. $100,000 to them. It was a hush money payoff. It was a cheap, quickly erased the forensic accountant who had unfortunately given birth to a daughter, Emma, and a son, Luke, who battled severe asthma. Patricia loved to loudly attribute my son's health issues to what she called the weak genetics on my side of the family. They wanted the house, they wanted the assets. Most importantly, they wanted room for Brittany, who was currently carrying what they constantly referred to as the true heir. Brittany leaned forward, intentionally catching the overhead lights with her left hand. A massive 4-carat cushion-cut diamond sparkled aggressively on her ring finger. It really is a lovely house, Clara, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Harrison and I already have the nursery planned out. We are doing a high-end safari theme for the baby. A growing boy needs a strong, masculine environment to thrive. Harrison finally looked up, his chest puffing out slightly at the mention of a boy. Just sign it, Clara. You are getting full custody. You are getting cash. Do not be vindictive. Just because things did not work out between us, I need to move on with my life, and my son deserves a proper home. I looked at the 4 of them, feeling an incredible sense of clarity. For 8 years, I had swallowed my pride to keep the peace. I had endured Patricia making backhanded compliments about my quaint career tracking numbers. I had stayed silent when Richard boasted about his real estate empire, while routinely exploiting legal loopholes that I could see right through. I had played the good, supportive wife, while Harrison spent his days playing at being a successful businessman on his father's dime. They expected me to break down. They wanted me to cry, to scream, to beg for my marriage, or to demand a fair share of the $2.5 million Beacon Hill estate that I had personally decorated. They wanted the satisfaction of watching me shatter. I simply picked up my pen. You are entirely right, Harrison, I said, my voice completely steady and devoid of a single Tremor, your son, deserves exactly the environment he is about to be born into. I uncapped the pen and signed my name on the first line, then the second line, then the third. My signature was precise, fluid. And final, I slid the thick stack of papers across the mahogany table toward their lawyer. I took the settlement check, folded it neatly in half, and slipped it into my purse. Patricia let out a long, theatrical sigh of relief, leaning back in her plush leather chair. Well, she announced, that was surprisingly civilized. I suppose even you know when you are outmatched. Clara, let us hope you use that money wisely. It will not last long if you do not find a proper job to support those children. Oh, I manage my finances very carefully. Patricia, I replied, standing up and smoothing the skirt of my dress. You would be surprised how much clarity you gain when you really look at the numbers. Brittany giggled, linking her arm through Harrison's arm. We have an appointment at the maternity clinic tomorrow morning for the final genetics screening and ultrasound, she announced to the room, though her eyes were locked onto mine, seeking a reaction. The whole family is coming. Patricia is officially transferring the baby trust fund after the appointment. It is going to be such a beautiful day for us. I would not miss it. The world, Richard boomed, snapping his briefcase shut. With a loud click, a new beginning. For the family. A new beginning indeed, I agreed softly. I looked down at the glittering ring on Brittany's finger. It was a ring bought just 3 weeks ago. It was a ring I knew for an absolute fact was purchased on the joint platinum credit card that I had secretly and legally unlinked my name from exactly 24 hours after the transaction went through. They thought they had won. They thought they had discarded me with a fraction of what I was owed. I turned and walked out of the conference room. I did not look back as the heavy glass doors sealed shut behind me, cutting off the sound of their self-congratulatory laughter. Let them have the Beacon Hill house. Let them have their safari-themed nursery. Let them bask in their perceived victory. What Harrison, Patricia, Richard, and Brittany did not know was that they were not sitting on an empire. They were sitting on a ticking financial time bomb, and I had just handed them the detonator. But before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand how I got here. You need to understand the 8 years of silence that built this trap. Because nothing I did that day was impulsive. Every single move was calculated across months of patient, invisible warfare. When I first met Harrison, I was a pragmatic numbers girl from a working-class neighborhood, dazzled by his polished charm and the illusion of his family dynasty. I had blindly fallen into an intricate trap completely disguised as a romantic fairy tale. The Harrison family brand was built entirely on smoke mirrors and aggressive public relations. Richard operated his real estate empire like a medieval king, demanding absolute loyalty and projecting an image of untouchable financial supremacy. He hosted lavish charity galas, drove imported sports cars, and wore custom-tailored suits that screamed old money. But as a forensic accountant, I quickly learned to read the silence between the numbers. The absolute truth was that Richard was a terrible, fundamentally incompetent businessman. He survived on aggressive leveraging, borrowing against properties that were already mortgaged to the hilt, and moving cash through a labyrinth of shell companies to cover his operating losses. The elite fam business was nothing more than a glorified Ponzi scheme running on fumes and family pride. Harrison was perfectly content to play the role of the princely heir, drawing an exorbitant salary for a job that consisted mostly of taking clients to golf courses and signing documents he never bothered to read. He lived in a blissful state of subsidized ignorance entirely. Dependent on the crumbling empire his father desperately tried to keep afloat, Patricia was the architect of the family social hierarchy, and she wielded her approval like a weapon. In her eyes, the world was divided into people who mattered and people who served those who mattered. Audrey Harrison, younger sister, was the undisputed golden child. Audrey could do no wrong, even as she drifted aimlessly from one expensive hobby to another, funded entirely by Richard dwindling credit lines. Patricia celebrated Audrey's mediocrity as if it were sheer genius, while simultaneously scrutinizing my every move. I was the outsider, the utility player brought in to handle the tedious mechanics of real life, while the royals danced at the ball. Patricia never missed a chance to remind me that my background was pedestrian. If I bought a dress off the rack, she would offer a tight, pitying smile and suggest I use the family stylist. If I cooked a meal myself, she would ask why I had not simply hired a caterer. Toxicity seeped in every interaction, poisoning the air we breathed. When Luke was born with severe asthma, Patricia treated it as a personal affront to the family bloodline. She loudly lamented that my inferior genetics had tainted their perfect pedigree. Harrison never once stood up for me. He simply nodded along with his mother, retreating to his study with a glass of scotch rather than defending his own wife and son. But the emotional abuse was merely the packaging for their true objective, which was relentless financial exploitation. When the market tightened and Richard's reckless investments began to sour, they suddenly remembered my professional expertise. Under the guise of bringing me into the inner circle, they asked me to sign a few guarantor forms to help secure better interest rates using my flawless credit score. "We are building this for your children," Clara Richard would say, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. "This is how legacy families operate. We share the risk to share the reward." It was a masterful manipulation. They used my fierce protective instinct for my children against me over the years. I became the invisible pillar, holding up their collapsing mansion. I balanced the books they destroyed. I restructured the debt they blindly accumulated, and I signed my name to commercial loans that kept their luxury vehicles in the driveway. In the driveway, they treated my pristine credit rating like an infinite bank account, assuming I would forever remain the quiet, dutiful accountant who was just grateful to be invited to their dinner table. They completely mistook my calculated silence for blind submission. They fatally mistook my enduring patience for inherent weakness. They never realized that a forensic accountant is trained to observe, to document, and to prepare. I spent 8 years cataloging every fraudulent tax return, every illegal transfer of corporate funds into personal accounts, and every forged signature. I mapped their entire financial ecosystem down to the last stolen dollar, while they were busy hosting cocktail parties and laughing at my expense. I was quietly building a firewall around myself and my children. And then 7 months ago, on a mundane Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. I was sitting in my home office, reviewing our quarterly personal expenses, when a glaring anomaly caught my eye. Forensic accountants do not see numbers as static figures on a page. We see them as a narrative, a map of human behavior. Harrison had charged $4,000 to a luxury boutique hotel downtown, categorized lazily under corporate client entertainment. It was a sloppy categorization, considering his father firm had suspended all luxury client perks a week earlier due to severe cash flow issues. I dug deeper. It took merely 3 clicks and a cross-reference with our joint credit card statements to unravel his secret life. There were expensive dinners at romantic restaurants, charges for high-end maternity wear, and a massive deposit to a private fertility clinic. The timeline was painfully clear. Harrison was not just having an affair with a 24-year-old named Brittany. He was building an entirely parallel life while I was washing his laundry and managing his children's medical appointments. Most spouses would have confronted their cheating partner immediately. They would have thrown plates, demanded answers, and wept over the betrayal. I did not shed a single tear when you realize the person you married is nothing more than a parasite. Grief is quickly replaced by a cold, calculating survival instinct. I closed the credit card statement and opened the broader financial portfolio of the Harrison family empire. If my husband was stupid enough to leave a digital travel of his infant in a joint account, what else were they hiding? What I found was breathtaking. In its sheer audacity and incompetence, Richard was operating a financial house of cards. He had created dozens of shell companies using the inflated equity from one commercial property to secure high interest loans for another. The market had shifted, property values had stagnated, and the entire structure was buckling. Buried beneath layers of corporate jargon and manipulated balance sheets was a staggering $15 million bad debt. It was a toxic, unpayable sum that was quietly accelerating toward a catastrophic default. And the only thing keeping the banks from calling in those loans was Mia. I pulled up the guarantor agreements. Richard had aggressively leveraged my immaculate credit score to secure the absolute lowest interest rates possible. My name was quietly tethered to every single failing asset in his portfolio. They were using my financial stability as a human shield. If Richard defaulted, the banks would come directly after my personal accounts, my savings as my children's future. They planned to let me sink with their ship while they hid whatever cash they could salvage in offshore accounts. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. I had to amputate myself from their financial corpse before the rot spread to my own life. I could not simply ask to be removed from the accounts. Richard would know I had seen the books, and Patricia would launch a legal war of attrition to freeze my assets. I had to use their own boundless arrogance against them. I immediately contacted an independent, highly specialized corporate attorney who had no ties to Boston High Society. Together, we crafted a surgical exit strategy. The key to breaking my liability lay in Richard's own arrogant negligence. Over the years, he had frequently forged my initials on routine loan renewals to save time. Assuming I would never audit my own father-in-law, he had unwittingly handed me the exact legal loophole I needed to destroy him. My attorney drafted formal declarations of fraudulent representation and unauthorized signatures. We filed these directly with the compliance departments of the 3 major banks holding Richard loans. We did it quietly, bypassing the local loan officers Richard usually bribed with country club dinners, and went straight to the federal compliance oversight teams. The moment a bank receives a credible allegation of forged guarantor signatures, federal banking regulations require them to instantly sever the contested liability to avoid massive compliance fines. Within 30 days, my name was entirely wiped from the $15 million toxic debt. The banks immediately flagged Richard accounts for high-risk review, but corporate audits take months to process. Richard remained completely oblivious. He thought the occasional bank inquiry was just routine paperwork. Next, I had to secure my parents' wealth. Early in our marriage, when Harrison was still pretending to be a self-made man, I had drafted a post-nuptial agreement. I had presented it to him as a tax optimization strategy, masking the ironclad asset protection clause under layers of boring accounting jargon. Harrison, eager to get back to his golf game, had signed it without reading past the first page. That document legally walled off my business income, my investments, and my personal savings from any marital dispute. With the postnuptial agreement activated, I systematically drained my exposed capital. I liquidated my domestic stock portfolios and transferred every available dollar into an untouchable, encrypted overseas trust based in Edinburgh. I left exactly enough money in the joint checking account to cover the utility bills and groceries, maintaining the perfect illusion of domestic normalcy. But I did not stop there. A forensic accountant knows exactly what the Internal Revenue Service looks for when auditing high net worth individuals. I compiled a meticulously organized 400-page dossier detailing Richard's rampant tax evasion, his offshore dodging, and his entirely fraudulent expense reporting. I mailed it anonymously to the whistleblower office. The federal government does not send polite warning letters when they receive airtight, undeniable evidence of a $15 million tax evasion scheme. They act with absolute terrifying precision. They freeze accounts, they seize assets, they lock down every penny before the targets even realize they are under a criminal investigation. Furthermore, by filing officially as a whistleblower, I was legally entitled to a percentage of the recovered funds. I was not just destroying their empire, I was going to be paid handsomely by the federal government for taking out the trash. And then there was the Beacon Hill mansion. During the divorce negotiations, Harrison and Patricia had fought tooth and nail to retain full ownership of the property. Patricia had practically gloated about keeping the custom Italian marble counters and the imported French chandeliers I had picked out. They firmly believed they were robbing me of a prime real estate asset. In reality, they were violently fighting over the steering wheel of a sinking ship. 5 years ago, Richard convinced Harrison to refinance the mansion using an adjustable rate mortgage to free up cash for a failing commercial venture. Because Harrison had no verifiable independent income that could ever satisfy the bank's strict underwriters, they had heavily relied on my pristine financial history as the primary guarantor. The precise moment I signed that divorce decree and my lawyer filed the paperwork to dissolve my financial connection to the marriage, the bank automated monitoring systems would instantly flag the mortgage without my 6-figure salary and my 820 credit score shielding the account. Harrison debt-to-income ratio would immediately trigger a default clause. That automated certified letter was already moving through the postal system, destined to land in their polished brass mailbox By Friday afternoon, they were eagerly trading a $100,000 settlement check for a multi-million-dollar foreclosure that would completely obliterate what was left of Harrison Financial. So my financial extraction was a complete ghost operation. I left absolutely no trace, no care forwarding address, and no warning. By the time Harrison walked into the kitchen 2 months ago and casually announced he wanted a divorce because he had outgrown our marriage, my financial extraction was already 100% complete. He stood by the granite island adjusting his expensive tie and told me that Brittany was pregnant with the true heir. He offered me the insulting $100,000 settlement and demanded I sign away the Beacon Hill house. He thought he was discarding a helpless dependent wife. He had no idea he was demanding the deed to a property that was already doomed. I had smiled at Harrison that morning, playing the role of the defeated woman to absolute perfection. I nodded submissively, packed my bags, and agreed to his terms. I let them believe they had outsmarted me. I let them gather their entire family for their grand victory lap at the maternity clinic. My financial web was severed, my children were safe, and my escape was secured. Now all I had to do was sit back and let their own catastrophic choices deliver the final blow. But there was one more thing. I knew something. None of them knew something that would make the clinic visit infinitely more devastating than any financial collapse. You see, numbers do not lie, and neither do hotel credit card authorizations. I knew exactly what Jamal was hiding, and I knew exactly what was growing inside Brittany's womb. Now let me take you back to that morning, the morning after I signed those papers. The morning everything fell apart for the Harrison family. The drive to Logan International Airport felt like a breathless escape. The adrenaline pumped through my veins, accelerating my reality. The Boston skyline blurred outside the window of my Uber. This was the city I had called home for nearly a decade, now rapidly shrinking in my rearview mirror. I checked my watch. It was 2:15 in the afternoon. My flight to Edinburgh, Scotland was scheduled to board at 4:30. I had exactly enough time to vanish before anyone realized what had truly happened. When I arrived at Terminal E, my nanny, Maria, was already waiting near the international check-in desks. She was holding 6-year-old Luke by the hand, while 8-year-old Emma sat dutifully on top of our matched black luggage. "Mommy," Emma shrieked, launching herself into my arms the moment she spotted me. "Hey, sweetie," I murmured, burying my face in her soft hair. Luke hugged my legs, his breathing steady and clear. I had packed his asthma medications, his nebulizer, and every piece of medical documentation we owned securely in my carry-on bag. I would never let anyone make him feel weak again. "Everything went smoothly?" Maria asked softly, handing me our 3 dark blue passports. "Perfectly," I said, offering her a genuine smile. "Thank you, Maria, for everything." I handed her a thick envelope containing a generous severance package and a glowing letter of recommendation. She hugged me tight, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She had lived in our house. She knew the hell I had silently endured for the past year. She knew about Harrison. Late nights, Patricia, unannounced inspections, and the suffocating atmosphere of a home built on lies. Once we cleared security and settled into the business class lounge, I pulled out my phone for the final time on American soil. I opened the family group. It was already blowing up. Group chat. It was already up with notifications. Audrey Harrison, younger sister, had just posted a photo of the divorce celebration lunch we're currently having at a high-end bistro downtown. The photo showed champagne glasses clinking with Brittany front and center, heavily pregnant and glowing with unearned victory. The text beneath the photo made me smirk. "So glad the dead weight is finally gone. I cannot wait to welcome my new nephew tomorrow. Brittany is already glowing." Patricia replied immediately, "The house feels lighter already. Tomorrow is going to be a perfect day for our family." Then came a message from Jamal, Audrey husband. Looking forward to it, I stared at Jamal. Brief message: Jamal, the quiet, impeccably dressed brother-in-law. He was the only African-American man in this overwhelmingly white, status-obsessed family. Jamal always played the role of the supportive, dignified husband to Audrey, nodding along with Patricia. Snide remarks, while keeping his own hands remarkably clean. I knew exactly what that message really meant, and I knew exactly what was about to happen in that clinic. I powered down my phone. I removed The protective case popped out the SIM card tray and pulled out the tiny piece of plastic that connected me to their toxic world. I dropped the SIM card into my empty water glass, watching it sink to the bottom. I did not need to see the fallout. I had orchestrated it to absolute perfection. I buckled my seatbelt. As the plane engines roared to life, the aircraft taxied down the runway, gaining speed, before finally lifting off the ground as the wheels tucked away, and we climbed higher into the clouds, severing my physical ties to the United States. I closed my eyes and allowed myself a genuine, peaceful smile. Tomorrow morning at 9, the 7 members of my ex-husband family would walk into that VIP maternity clinic expecting to crown their new king. They had absolutely no idea they were walking straight into a slaughterhouse. Now picture this with me, because what happened next is something you cannot make up. The morning sun broke across the Boston skyline, casting long, sharp shadows. Over the cobblestone streets of Beacon Hill, the city awoke with its usual brisk energy, entirely indifferent to the catastrophic shift about to occur within one of its most self-important families. At exactly 8:45, a pair of gleaming black SUVs pulled up to the valet stand of the Horizon 5 maternity clinic. The facility was an exclusive ultra-modern medical center catering strictly to the wealthiest residents of Massachusetts. It featured private entrances, catered waiting rooms, and doctors who charged exorbitant retainer fees just to keep their cell phones on at night. This was exactly the kind of sterile, high-status environment where the family felt most at home. Richard stepped out of the lead vehicle, first tossing his keys to the valet with a practiced flick of his wrist. He adjusted his expensive wool coat, puffing out his chest as he served the glass facade of the building to anyone passing by. He looked like a titan of industry, a man completely in control of his vast real estate empire. He wore his arrogance like a second skin, completely oblivious to the fact that federal investigators were likely already reviewing the explosive financial dossier sitting on a desk in Washington. Patricia emerged from the passenger side, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. She wore a tailored beige suit and clutched a thick monogrammed leather portfolio tightly against her chest. Inside that portfolio rested the legal documents required to transfer $5 million into a newly established trust fund. She patted the leather affectionately, her face flushed with the thrill of total victory. From the second SUV, Harrison emerged. He quickly walked around to the passenger side, opening the door with a theatrical display of chivalry. Brittany stepped out, her hand resting heavily on her 5-month baby bump. She wore a tight designer maternity dress, clearly purchased on the joint credit card I had already canceled. The morning sunlight caught the massive 4-carat cushion-cut diamond on her ring finger, sending fractured rainbows dancing across the pavement. Behind them, Audrey, she did not even bother greeting the valet. Her phone was already out, held high at arm length, as she meticulously documented the grand arrival for her social media followers. She adjusted her hair, flashing a brilliant, entirely manufactured smile at the camera lens while narrating their monumental family milestones. And walking quietly beside Audrey was her husband Jamal, a tall, impeccably dressed man. Jamal moved with a quiet, deliberate grace that sharply contrasted with the chaotic, loud energy of his in-laws. He wore a sharp charcoal suit and kept his hands resting casually in his pockets. His face was a mask of serene composure, revealing absolutely nothing of the devastating secret he held. He offered a polite nod to the clinic staff at the door, his eyes completely unreadable as he followed his wife into the building. The family congregated in the expansive marble-floored lobby of the clinic. Their family attorney rose from a waiting chair and approached them. "Everything is finalized and ready for your signature." Patricia, the lawyer, said, "The trust accounts are primed the moment the doctor confirms the genetic screening and gives the baby a clean bill of health. We can execute the transfer immediately." "Excellent," Patricia replied, her voice carrying an air of absolute royalty. "A healthy baby boy is exactly what this family needs, a strong heir to carry the name forward." Harrison puffed out his chest, wrapping his arms securely around Brittany's waist. "He is going to be perfect. Mom, Brittany comes from great athletic stock. We will not have to deal with any of the weakness we saw in the past. This kid is going to be a powerhouse." The group moved toward the private VIP elevators demanding the space entirely for themselves. The door slid shut, sealing the 7 of them inside the mirrored box. The atmosphere was intoxicatingly arrogant. They were high on their own perceived brilliance, deeply convinced that they had executed the perfect transition of power. Jamal stood in the back corner of the elevator, watching the numbers climb higher and higher. He offered a small, polite smile when Audrey turned the camera toward him, playing his part to perfection. The elevator chimed, announcing their arrival at the top floor. The doors slid open to reveal a sprawling, luxuriously appointed waiting area. They settled into this waiting area like conquering monarchs claiming their new throne. Patricia placed the leather portfolio containing the $5 million trust documents directly on the glass coffee table in front of her. She tapped her fingers against the leather, eager to sign her name and officially secure the future of the family empire. They were completely insulated by their boundless hubris, fully believing that they had won the war. They had absolutely no idea that the ground beneath their feet had already vanished. Audrey threw herself onto the oversized velvet sofa, immediately adjusting the portable lighting ring attached to her phone case. "Good morning, everyone," Audrey purred into the camera. "We are officially at the clinic today. It's the day we confirm the newest, most perfect addition to our family. The true heir is almost here." Brittany is glowing, Harrison is ecstatic, and my parents are literally crying with joy. Stay tuned for updates. With the video posted, Audrey turned her attention back to the room. She looked at Brittany, who was sipping a sparkling water and basking in the undivided attention of her future in-laws. "You know, Brittany," Audrey said, leaning forward conspiratorially, "you really are the best thing that has ever happened to my brother. The energy in the family is just so much for now. It is like a dark cloud has finally lifted." Patricia nodded vigorously in agreement. "A dark cloud is exactly right." Audrey Clara always brought such a depressing, heavy atmosphere to every family event. She never knew how to engage with our social circle. She always looked like she belonged behind a reception desk, not at the head table. Brittany offered a sympathetic, deeply patronizing smile. "I cannot even imagine dealing with that for 8 years, but do not worry, Patricia. I already contacted a premier interior designer. We are completely gutting the Beacon Hill house. Every single trace of her boring pedestrian taste is going straight into a dumpster by next week." "That is my girl," Harrison cheered, kissing Brittany on the cheek. "Out with the old, in with the better." Standing quietly near the floor-to-ceiling windows, completely detached from the vicious gossip, was Jamal. He looked out over the Boston's skyline, an expression of serene indifference painted across his handsome face. Audrey pointed her phone at him, launching a live video broadcast. "And here is my amazing husband Jamal, the best uncle-to-be. Are you excited for the new baby, babe?" Jamal turned from the window, offering the camera a flawless megawatt smile. "I am incredibly excited, Audrey. This family is about to experience a day they will never ever forget. I would not miss this moment for anything in the world." His voice was smooth, rich, and entirely devoid of sarcasm. Audrey giggled, completely missing the loaded double meaning behind his words. Jamal turned his gaze back to the window, the smiles instantly dropping from his face. The reflection in the glass showed a man who was acutely aware of the ticking clock. He knew exactly what was growing inside Brittany. He knew the biological impossibility that was about to be laid bare on a sterilized medical table. He was a man who had tolerated their condescension and their subtle, insidious racism. For years he had sat at their dining table, eating their expensive food, while they treated him as a token of their progressive tolerance. He had played their game flawlessly, and now he was simply waiting for the doctor to walk through those heavy wooden doors and deliver the final devastating blow to the Harrison family bloodline. Patricia picked up the gold pen, testing its heavy weight in her hand. She held it just inches above the signature line, hovering in a state of suspended anticipation. "I want Doctor to see this," she declared. "I want Dr. Evans to witness the exact moment we secure the Harrison legacy. It makes it all the more official." Right on cue, the heavy oak doors to the consultation suite swung open. This time, the crisp rustle of a white medical coat announced the arrival of the man they had all been eagerly waiting for. Dr. Evans walked into the room carrying a thick medical file. His demeanor was distinctly different from the cheerful, congratulatory tone he had displayed during the earlier ultrasound. His shoulders were slightly rigid, and his eyes remained fixed firmly on the floor as he approached the center of the room. He did not look at the proud grandfather. He did not look at the glowing mother-to-be. He did not look at the gold pen resting in Patricia's hand. He simply stood at the end of the examination table, clutching the genetic surroundings like a heavy anchor. The room grew entirely silent, the family arrogant chatter instantly evaporating as they noticed the severe, unsmiling expression on the doctor's face. The stage was finally set. The audience was captive. The destruction was imminent. Dr. Evans cleared his throat, the dry sound breaking the heavy silence that had suddenly descended upon the luxurious consultation room. Let us start with the baseline developmental metrics, Dr. Evans said. His voice projected a calm, authoritative resonance that immediately put the anxious room at ease. The anatomical growth is exactly where we want it to be. At 20 weeks gestation, the spinal development is flawless. The fetal heart rate is strong, steady, and perfectly rhythmic. All major internal organs are forming exactly on schedule without any visible structural defects. Harrison puffed his chest out, a wide, triumphant grin spreading across his face. Knew it, he declared, squeezing Brittany's hand with aggressive pride. Nothing but the absolute best, a true Harrison. And the gender? Patricia asked urgently. Her fingers gripped the heavy gold fountain pen, hovering anxiously over the $5 million trust document. We are certain it is a boy. We need absolute verification before I sign these legal transfers. Dr. Evans nodded, offering a tight, obligatory smile. The chromosomal analysis confirms it with absolute medical certainty. You are having a boy. The room immediately erupted into a chaotic chorus of elite self-congratulation. Richard let out a booming theatrical laugh, clapping Harrison on the back. Patricia clasped her manicured hands together in pure ecstasy. Audrey squealed loudly, instantly raising her smartphone to record her own reaction. For her thousands of online followers, Jamal's Will stood perfectly still by the expansive glass window. He did not clap. He did not cheer. He did not offer a single word of congratulation. He simply maintained his serene, polite smile, watching the arrogant circus unfold with the detached, cold amusement of a man holding a hidden detonator. This is the greatest day in the history of our family, Patricia announced. She positioned the sharp tip of the gold pen directly over the signature line of the thick legal document. Dr. Evans, your confirmation was the final piece we needed today. I am executing this massive financial transfer right now to protect my grandson. Mrs. Harrison, please wait. Dr. Evans said. His voice was no longer accommodating or gentle. It was sharp, carrying an urgent, clinical weight that instantly froze Patricia's hands in midair. The celebratory atmosphere vanished in an absolute instant, replaced by a sudden suffocating chill. The air in the consultation suite felt as if it had been violently sucked through the ventilation. Thence Richard stopped laughing. Mid-articles, Harrison's triumphant smile collapsed into a defensive, confused scowl. Audrey slowly lowered her expensive phone, her thumb hovering uncertainly over the bright red record button. Dr. Evans flipped past the initial growth charts to the deeper, far more complex sections of the non-invasive prenatal testing report. The crisp, sharp rustle of the heavy paper was the only sound echoing in the silent room. He took a deep breath, looking directly at Harrison and then slowly shifting his gaze toward Brittany. The expanded NIPT is an incredibly sophisticated screening tool. Dr. Evans began, his tone slow, deliberate, and entirely devoid of emotion. It does not just tell us the gender or check for common chromosomal abnormalities. We ordered the comprehensive expanded genetic panel, precisely per your family explicit request, for the absolute highest tier of specialized medical care available. We wanted the best, Harrison interrupted, his tone laced with rising irritation. We paid for the best. What is the problem? You just said my son is perfectly healthy. Your baby is currently developing. Normally, Dr. Evans clarified, choosing his words with surgical precision. However, the expanded genetic panel flags highly specific hereditary markers. It screens for recessive traits that are passed down directly from the biological parents. When a specific genetic marker is flagged by the laboratory, it is my strict medical and ethical obligation to discuss the biological implications with the parents immediately. Patricia scoffed loudly, dropping the heavy gold pen onto the glass coffee table. With a sharp, ringing clatter, genetic markers, that is completely absurd. The Harrison bloodline is absolutely impeccable. We do not have a history of any genetic diseases or weaknesses. If there is an anomaly on that paper, it must be a ridiculous laboratory error. Brittany shifted uncomfortably on the examination table, pulling the thin paper sheet slightly higher over her exposed stomach. Her previously glowing Victoria's complexion suddenly turned a sickly shade of pale gray. Is something wrong with my baby? She asked, her voice tight with rising panic. My family does not have any health problems at all. We are totally normal. Dr. Evans adjusted his glasses, his tired eyes locked firmly onto the dense rows of genetic sequencing data. The laboratory ran a comprehensive genetic screen on the fetal DNA extracted from Brittany's blood sample. Dr. Evans explained, keeping his voice carefully neutral. The results clearly indicate that the fetus is a carrier for the sickle cell trait. A profound, echoing silence filled the luxurious consultation suite. The medical term hung heavily in the sterilized air, completely alien to the Harrison family, carefully curated vocabulary. Richard blinked, his thick brow furrowing as he struggled to process the information. Patricia withdrew her hand from the trust document as if the paper had suddenly caught fire. Harrison looked entirely bewildered, staring at the doctor as if the man had just started speaking a foreign language. Sickle cell trait, Harrison repeated, his tone laced with a mixture of aggressive skepticism and arrogant dismissal. What on earth are you talking about, Dr. Evans? Neither Brittany nor I have any history of whatever that is. We are perfectly healthy. We only associate with healthy people. I understand this is unexpected. Dr. Evans continued, holding his ground against the rising tide of hostility. Sickle cell trait occurs when a child inherits one sickle cell gene and one normal gene. The baby will live a normal, healthy life. The medical concern is not the immediate health of the child. The medical concern from a purely genetic standpoint is how the child acquired the trait in the first place. Brittany sat up straighter on the examination table, her blue eyes darting frantically between Harrison and the doctor. I do not understand, she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. How does a baby get it if we do not have it? Did you do something wrong during the test? Did the clinic contaminate my blood sample? Dr. Evans shook his head firmly. There was no contamination. Brittany, the laboratory operates under the strictest federal protocols. When they flagged this specific genetic marker, I immediately ordered them to rerun the entire sequencing panel to verify the findings. They processed the secondary sample. Twice the results are absolute and medically undeniable. He took a deliberate step back from the examination table, crossing his arms over his white coat. Sickle cell trait is a highly specific genetic marker. Dr. Evans explained, his gaze moving slowly from Harrison to Brittany. It is a hereditary condition, predominantly found in populations of African, Mediterranean, or Middle Eastern descent. It is extraordinarily rare in individuals of exclusively Northern European Caucasian ancestry for a child to carry the sickle cell trait. It is an absolute biological requirement that at least one of the biological parents must carry the genetic marker and pass it down. The doctor stopped speaking. He let the undeniable weight of the medical science crash into the room. He looked at Harrison, a man with pale skin, light brown hair, and distinctly Northern European features. He looked at Brittany, a woman with bright blonde hair, pale skin, and striking blue eyes, two Caucasian parents, expecting a child who carried a genetic trait inextricably linked to a completely different demographic. Harrison let out a loud, mocking laugh, throwing his hands up in the air in an exaggerated display of outrage. This is a joke, he declared, looking around the room for validation from his powerful father. This is a complete scam. You are looking at two white people. Doc, my family traces its lineage back to the Mayflower. Brittany family's from a tiny farming town in the Midwest. Neither of us has a single drop of African or Middle Eastern blood in our entire genetic history. Your expensive laboratory completely botched the test. I assure you there was no mix-up. Dr. Evans replied firmly, tapping the thick file on the counter. The fetal DNA matched the maternal DNA extracted from Brittany's blood sample with 99.9% certainty. We know unequivocally that this is her biological child. The maternal genetic contribution is absolute. The anomaly lies entirely within the paternal genetic contribution. What exactly are you implying? Richard roared, stepping forward to defend his son. Honor. His face flushed a dark, angry red, the veins in his neck bulging against his starched collar. Are you standing there, accusing my son of not being the father of his own child? Are you accusing my future daughter In law of infidelity right in front of her family. I am not making accusations. Mr. Harrison, Dr. Evans replied, his voice remaining totally clinical and detached. I'm simply presenting the biological facts. The genetics of the fetus contain a hereditary marker that cannot be biologically reconciled with Harrison's genetic profile. As your physician, it is my duty to inform you that based on the irrefutable results of the expanded NIPT screening, it is genetically impossible for Harrison to be the biological father of this child. The words struck the room like a physical shockwave. The absolute certainty of the doctor's statement shattered the family's impenetrable bubble of arrogance. The silence that followed was agonizing, deafening, suffocating. No one moved, no one breathed. The air grew stagnant as the horrifying truth began to permeate their self-righteous minds. The perfect heir, the $5 million trust fund baby, the triumphant replacement for the boring accountant and her defective children was a complete biological fraud. Harrison turned his head slowly, his eyes wide and wild, locking onto Brittany. The proud, triumphant smirk he had worn since walking into the clinic melted into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Babe, tell him he is wrong, Harrison demanded, his voice cracking under the crushing weight of a reality he was completely unequipped to handle. Doctor, he made a mistake. Tell my parents. This is just a stupid medical error. Brittany opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her throat worked frantically as she swallowed hard. The thick layers of artificial confidence she had worn into the clinic vanished in an instant, leaving behind a terrified 24-year-old girl who had just been caught in the ultimate grift. Brittany, Patricia snapped, her voice cracking like a leather whip across the quiet room. Answer him immediately. Explain this right now. I do not know, Brittany stammered, her voice thin and trembling. I swear to you, Harrison, I swear. I have not been with anyone else. It has to be a mistake. The lab messed up. They swapped the vials. It is a hospital error. Dr. Evans did not flinch. He stepped forward, placing the open folder directly onto the sterile counter so the undeniable data was visible to everyone in the room. There was no mix-up, Dr. Evans reiterated firmly. We ran the sequence twice to completely rule out any possibility of laboratory error. The genetic markers are absolutely conclusive. The maternal DNA is a perfect match to you, Brittany, but the paternal DNA carries a sequence that Harrison simply does not possess. It is biologically impossible for this child to be yours, Harrison. The science is absolute. The word impossible hung heavily in the air, echoing off the cold medical equipment and the expensive artwork on the walls. It was a word the Harrison family rarely heard and never accepted since they were accustomed to buying their way out of inconveniences, manipulating facts to suit their narratives, and crushing anyone who dared to oppose their version of reality. But they could not bribe a chromosomal sequence. They could not threaten a strand of DNA into submission. Richard staggered backward as if he had been physically struck in the chest. The booming, authoritative patriarch, who just minutes ago had been boasting about securing his family dynasty, now looked entirely hollowed out. He reached out to steady himself against the wall, his chest heaving as the implications crashed over him. He had alienated his loyal daughter-in-law, abandoned his own grandchildren, and risked extreme public humiliation, all to secure a bastard child that did not even carry a single drop of his blood. Patricia stood frozen like a statue carved from ice. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the manila envelope resting on the glass coffee table. The $5 million trust document. Just moments ago, it had been her ultimate weapon, the instrument of my complete erasure. Now it was a glaring monument to her own spectacular success. Harrison stepped away from the examination table, putting physical distance between himself and Brittany. He looked down at his hands as if he no longer recognized them. His entire identity was wrapped up in his family name, his perceived virility, and his arrogant assumption that he commanded the loyalty of everyone around him. He had thrown away an 8-year marriage and 2 children because he firmly believed he was entitled to a perfect, uncomplicated heir. Who is it? Harrison whispered, his voice completely devoid of its usual arrogant boom. It was a fragile, broken sound. If it is not mine, then whose is it? Harrison, please, you have to believe me. Brittany cried, fresh tears spilling over her mascara, leaving dark streaks down her pale cheeks. I only wanted you. I only love you. It was a mistake. It meant nothing. I swear to God, it meant absolutely nothing. Her desperate, panicked confession was the final nail in the coffin. It was a complete admission of guilt she had just admitted in front of the entire Harrison family that she had slept with someone else since. The agonizing silence that swept through the clinic room following her admission was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet that seemed to suck the oxygen straight out of the atmosphere. No one yelled, no one threw anything. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal was too massive to process through immediate violence. It was the sound of a dynasty collapsing inward, crushed by the weight of its own unmitigated hubris. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Who was the father? How had she managed to deceive them so completely? And most importantly, how could a genetic marker found predominantly in African or Middle Eastern populations end up in the DNA of a child conceived by a blonde girl from the Midwest? As the seconds, agonizingly ticked by the heavy silence, demanded an answer, the genetic impossibility required a biological explanation. The entire family remained completely paralyzed, trapped in their own shock, unable to piece together the final devastating puzzle. The realization crept into the room like a slow, paralyzing frost. Patricia was the first to break the physical stillness. Her eyes darted away from Brittany and moved toward the doctor, her mind desperately trying to process the medical terminology that had just dismantled her entire reality. Sickle cell trait, a genetic